Hi, good morning, Black people. Hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. As we get, get close to the finish line here, please, again, as always, make sure you see how these chapters tie in and connect to one another. Um, and of course, we want to get the testable information as much as possible, but make sure that we, really labor to understand some of the core concepts in these chapters as well. So one of the things that I've talked about in here is that an attractive aspect of I'll speak for myself specifically that an absolute attractive aspect of living in or near big cities is sports and having access to that on a professional level in particular. Um, many and most major cities will either have a sports franchise, and even if you're not near your favorite team, you get a chance to see them. As I've had the opportunity, Stephen, to see the Dallas Cowboys lose in both Charlotte and Atlanta in recent years since I've been living down here. And in this way, one of the things also we talked about how um, cities use buildings to attract people to their cities. Athletics is a huge aspect of this. This is why you see cities competing for franchises and leveraging one city against the other. So you see when you see St. Louis down there at the bottom, how the Rams, for example, they started off, when I was a kid, I was in LA, moved to St. Louis, moved back to LA. And I'm sure, again, if you're a football fan, you've noted uh, they got a very nice stadium out of the deal in Los Angeles. And that was the whole goal. They wanted St. Louis to build them a stadium with taxpayer money. These are really important components. They wanted St. Louis to build them a stadium with taxpayer money. St. Louis like, no, we ain't gonna be able to foot that bill, dog. LA's like, hey, come on out here. We'll be able to get you all a stadium built. And cities do this because, again, so that stadium in LA is not going to just be used to build revenue for the Rams. They're going to use that for all types of events. Hopefully, you got a chance to see that spectacular UCLA Gonzaga game over the weekend. One of the best games I personally have ever seen. But I mentioned that how Indianapolis, they have Final Fours and different events there every few years. I'm sure that in LA, they're gonna have Final Fours and stuff there. They already are in line to host the Super Bowl. So cities, Atlanta and building the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They did it to attract events, college football playoff and the like. Now they better get their voting stuff in order down there in Georgia. Otherwise, the good Black people of this country who play many of these sports are going to ensure that there'll be a lot fewer events held down there in the Mercedes-Benz Dome. Much like they just lost the All-Star game over the weekend because of their Jim Crow racist laws. But I say all this to say just to really stress and making those interconnections, the great importance of sports in kind of creating an urban feel. Hugely important. Many individuals, get in many ways their urban identity from their sports teams and things like that. When you think of psychotic people like Eagles fans or something. But they started with baseball many years ago. And the rise of baseball actually coincided with the transformation of America from a rural to an urban industrial society. Baseball quickly became a source of identification with the larger community in a way that, football and basketball would later. Football oftentimes has more of a regional feel. So, the New England Patriots play in Boston, but there are people that, from Maine to New Hampshire, they're also get that strong identification affiliation. But sports like baseball and basketball are really tied closely to particular cities. It was one of the first commercialized spectator events that was a product of an urban environment. Again, you have all these people coming from disparate places, as we talked about in earlier chapters. A lot of these people are just looking for something to do. So they might go check out a ball game. You got these Irish people, these German people, these people from the Black South. And in many ways, they're learning about the culture and society through the sport. The games very quickly became a source of civic pride. And victory was like, seen as evidence of like both economic and cultural superiority, where again, when the Patriots are winning all those Super Bowls, which I feel confident is probably like, come to an end at this stage. But Bostonians would not just feel like, pride in their, in their team, they would feel pride in their city, particularly during a period where like, the Red Sox would be winning World Series, the hockey team would be doing well. The Celtics even got one within this span. So a lot of like, a lot of civic pride or disappointment comes with like, being associated with like certain teams. Cleveland, for example, is a downtrodden, oftentimes beaten up economically and politically city. And they really embody the suffering that goes along with their teams. Due to Draymond Green being ejected needlessly earlier in the series, Cleveland was able to eventually bring an NBA championship to their city. But they still lament. Been a long time since the Browns and the Cleveland Indians have won. And they kind of wear that, with their city. Many of these sports, and baseball is no exception, was originally associated with lower class individuals that if you look at the early stories and the folklore associated with Major League Baseball, these would be some rough and tumble cats. They also attracted unruly fans. So like early baseball games, like, DNN now, I suppose, people would go to the games and they would get scummy drunk. Fans would be wilding out, saying all types of things, to players and stuff, going out on the field. Keep in mind, this is the 1910s, 1920s, 30s. So it's a very different society and culture. Cats cursing out, sometimes even fighting umpires. But eventually they began to charge fees. And this is an important component that we'll talk about probably beginning on Wednesday. And by charging more money to attend the game, that weeded out a lot of lower class fans and made it where they couldn't pay to get in. But and seating also with this way, seating was and is segregated by class. Keep this in mind what we talked about before, right? That, we talked about the public realm, that the city exists in three realms. So you have the parochial, the private, and the public realm. So the public realm is where people are supposed to be able to come and interact within this space on somewhat equal footing within these urban environments. But through processes like this, it very much made it where how much money you had kind of gave you more access over others. So we're talking about this in the 1920s and 30s. As we move into the late 20th and 21st century, we see this even more on display in terms of like a segregation of fans. So in this way, Charles, everybody in the city of Chicago may love the Bulls. Everybody can't go to the games. So when you're watching an NBA game, and this is true in most any city that you go to, like the people that you see in the stands, like are the people that can afford to pay. And those tickets, are very expensive. Your average NBA game, probably paying at least $85. Oftentimes much more than that. And you're paying $85 for like bad seats. So for many people, it's easier and cheaper just, to watch at home. Yeah, you gotta pay a lot to get in to get seats where you can actually see the court. You gotta pay for parking, and God help you if you bring your family, they want some refreshments. I mean, you can easily be coming out of like a G just trying to go to a game. So that makes it where a lot of fans, are kind of shut off from that process. A lot of working class people, and quite frankly, a lot of Black and brown people, particularly in these new stadiums. So, like using Chicago as an example, when we talk about the early stadiums, right? And this is important because in the cities that you live in, a lot of times, when they talk about building new stadiums, that comes from taxpayer money. It's really important to understand that cities oftentimes crime broke. We don't have enough money to pave the roads. We don't have enough money to improve the schools. But there's almost always money for stuff like this. And the early stadiums, so again, much like the early architecture that we talked about, in New York, Chicago, Paris, San Francisco, the stadiums were kind of like, a draw to pull people into cities. So yeah, same holds true here today. In Chicago, Wrigley Field is a national monument, like meaning that if you bought the team, Deshaun, and decided that you wanted to get a new, bigger, better stadium, you couldn't legally do that without going through a whole bunch of changes. So it's a protected, much like Chappelle Hall. It's a historically protected building that even if Dr. McNeely wants to make some changes and adjustments to it, he has to go through the legal channels to get permission, because it's considered a building that's historically important, for the history and legacy of Black people and in the state of South Carolina and within the nation. A lot of amazing things have happened within that building. So the same thing is true of places like Wrigley Field, Fenway Park in Boston, where oftentimes, Hashan, people will come to these cities just to see that. So I know for me, for example, and I hate the Red Sox, but before I die, it's a must that I see a game at Fenway Park at some point. I would feel, as a sports fan, I would feel incomplete if that didn't happen. With that in mind, again, I know there's a lot of hateration and stuff, but you should go see Jerry World at some point. Again, for better or worse, it was built, for that purpose, and it was really unique and state of the art when it built. In my opinion, both the stadiums in LA and Minnesota look better to me. Hell, on the outside, the stadium in Atlanta looks better. I like Jerry World better inside, but the point being that these stadiums are built with a huge amount of money. In the case of the Cowboys, Jerry, he got a lot of corporate money. But I know, when they were remodeling Soldier Field, in many ways, in Chicago, in many ways, it looks ridiculous. That was taxpayer money. But the Bears would be if you don't help build us, a new stadium, then we're going to leave and go to another city. And it seems unthinkable, but the Baltimore Ravens that you may be aware of and know and love, that's somebody else's team. The Tennessee Titans that you root for, Stephen, that's somebody else's team. Used to be the Houston Oilers.
That's kind of like the Rams, so we in St. Louis.
Absolutely. So teams that, again, it would be unthinkable. It would be unheard of. It was just really, the same way that it would be almost impossible to think of the Lakers being outside of Los Angeles. That's almost how it was when Cleveland moved to Baltimore. It was crazy. And that's why the NFL rushed so quickly to make sure that they got a team in Cleveland, because there are some markets where it's look, as a league, we have to have a team there.
Dr. Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
How much does the people who names be on the stadium have?
Excellent question, young man. Excellent question. one extra credit point for that question. Actually, this is the type of critical thinking that we want to encourage in this space and environment. Then one of the things where you may see like an AT&T stadium, a Bank Life Stadium is that those companies pay, instead of having taxpayers pay for it, they'll pay Jerry Jones or the owner of the team. They'll pay them license fees to cut down on some of the costs that it was used to build a stadium. It's pretty annoying to me, but that's the reason why. So Mercedes-Benz Stadium, because Mercedes-Benz put down a lot of the money. And for them to shine, much like we talked about, right, the Woolworth building in New York. We talked about that in the first half of the chapter, that the first half of the class, that the same thing there, that it's free advertising, where every Sunday you're here live from Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Mercedes-Benz, Mercedes-Benz, Mercedes-Benz. Welcome back to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. No, the score is 35-10 Falcons, but just wait around. They're gonna blow the lead any moment now. But yeah, that's the reason why. All about capitalism. And the newspapers played a major role again in kind of creating the environment. Because again, different cities' fan bases kind of have certain personalities. So again, like real talk, like the Philadelphia fans, and I say it with affection, I respect it. One of my great frustrations, in fact, it works out well for me, but because places like Charlotte and Atlanta is so many people that live there that are from other places, it doesn't have the same kind of passion and for their teams that you do in some of the northern cities. This don't mean that the northern cities are so special, unique. I think some of that will come into the Carolinas and Atlanta over time. Those teams are just older. So people that are Bear fans, they've been Bear fans 3-4 generations. I think I recall, I may have told this story here, when I moved down here, maybe within my first year or two, I went to see the Bulls play I think they were still the Bobcats then, but playing the Hornets in Charlotte. And this is back during Derrick Rose had 2 good knees at this time, just to give you some context. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. And one of the dudes had came down who worked for the Hornets, because they weren't drawing a large fan base right now. They're doing better now. Got a nice little young team, and more people moved into the area. But one of the dudes who worked for the team, he came down and introduced himself, talked to me and tried to get me to buy season tickets. He's like, hey, since you live in Charlotte, you're going to be you'll probably be a Hornet fan now, right? And I'm looking at him he's smoking crack. What? Dude, no. I can live down here for 300 years. I'm always going to be a Bull fan. We sorry as hell now. I'm still riding with my squad. I don't know what to tell you. It's impossible. So we're in this way, at that game in particular, right? It was 80% Bull fans up in there, because you have so many people that relocate. You get watch on TV when you see the Hawks playing or something like that. They play the Knicks or the Celtics when things get back to normal. It's going to be mainly fans from other places, so in this way, even when people relocate, it gets really embedded within them. But in the big northern cities, again, something that's really different, people will take it serious. Down here, it's more college football. People are really psychotic about that in a way that's not true up north. But the professional teams, again, Panther fans, they be about it. It's a whole nother level with Bear fans, New York Giant fans, teams like that. And again, I think a lot of it just attributed to the youth. And very early on, the media did an effective job of kind of weeding the teams to these fan bases in these cities. Baseball was initially known as America's game. I do not believe it's that today, and I'm a huge baseball fan, but it's not the national pastime anymore. Football clearly reigns supreme overall. Again, not talking an opinion, statistically speaking, the NFL dwarfs the other leagues in terms of revenue. And ratings.
You
Like,
was in,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Deshaun.
you was living in Chicago during that Jordan era.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
No, that had to be lit.
Oh,
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was
what?
amazing. Yes. It's literally one of the single best days about my childhood. Like being that, and that's a great example. Like I think again, like it was dope to see for everybody. I think across the nation, but to live in Chicago, like at that time, God. And it was a great example. Like it drove so much revenue for everybody. Like even if you weren't sports affiliated, like when a game was on, and so like the bars and clubs, like I mean, would just be packed. Nobody moving. And to be able to kind of expect that and have that boost in the economy, like, effectively for like, 10 years, not the Bulls won all of those 10 years during the peak joint, but, we were advancing deep into the playoffs at that time. And yeah, there was a lot of pride and kind of like almost looking down upon other cities at that time, particularly as related to basketball. So like I said, probably, the way that Boston fans have felt, during the Patriots run. And not none of these bandwagon fans who became Patriot fans and grew up in like, Mississippi and stuff. I'm talking about the real hardcore Patriot fans. But all of these sports, and it's important again to look at these things, like, even in looking at when we talk about urban environments, like we'll talk about this probably on Wednesday with basketball, how the style of play, like each city almost kind of has its own unique style of play. So like if you watch like again, a hooper, like, a New York ball player like plays different than a cat that grew up in LA. So in the same way, like the culture plays a role locally, we also see this in terms of like the sport itself, baseball itself. In baseball, in fact, one of the things that's really dope is it's become so diverse in the 21st century, where you got cats from Latin America playing, you got cats from Asia playing, is that their cultures come through in how they play. So like, the Latin players, for example, they're very like, flamboyant and fiery, very intense. The Asian cats, they're very like, understated and very precise with how they go about like their job. Americans got like, real confidence and swagger and stuff. So you see this again in baseball itself. That again, it's a game that, exudes great confidence. It's very combative, but it requires a whole bunch of discipline. It takes a lot of persistence because you're going to fail a whole bunch of times, and it requires vigor. And in this way, these are all characteristics that are very unique to America as well. There are three myths of baseball. One is that it was a rural sport. Also, that it's a means for social integration that through much of its history, as you all know, even if you're not a baseball fan, I'm sure you're very familiar with the story of Jackie Robinson.
Dr. Muhammad, how you feel about the because we talked about a little bit about that in the last chapter. How you feel about people coming over like with different cultures, like joining like our sports and taking over? Because if you watch baseball over the weekend, that dude who played for the Angels who threw over 100 and hit that ball, man. How you feel about that? I don't really too much care for all the race mixing.
I think it's dope, actually. Keep in mind what we just talked about with Jackie Robinson. Like, so if we didn't care for race, if we didn't support some degree of race mixing, at least, like these cats might still have it being like, all white people playing baseball. So as somebody who's absolutely like enthusiastically supported like the integration like of Jackie Robinson into baseball, I couldn't philosophically support discriminating against anybody else, particularly, right? Keep in mind what we just talked about, that baseball is supposed to be America's game, and keep in mind how we imagine America to be. America has not often been this place, but America is supposed to be the place of equal opportunity. America is supposed to be the place that just like, judged you on your merit. and doesn't like, look at, your color, your race, your creed, and all those kind of things. That's the mythology of America. So in that way, nah, man, like I want the best players to be playing. I don't care where they from or what they look like. As somebody who has a root interest in this sport as a Cub fan, I need the best players. I don't care if they green. And there's a lot of really good players all across the world. And then, quite frankly, the sport is a lot more boring when it's only white people playing it. Like, I think the vast majority of white fans would agree with that. Like, so these different styles and stuff like that, like, something like the reason why you could see Ohtani do something like that, Deshaun, is because he came from a culture where they would actually try that. In America, we don't be letting players do like stuff like that. It's like, no, you got to either pitch or hit. You got to decide when you're 14 and you can only do one thing for the rest of your life. He lived in a culture that's like, you know what? Go ahead and keep trying. If you mess up, we'll pull you. So we wouldn't get a chance to even see that if it were not for that level of integration. But no, I think it's been wonderful for the sport. We're going to see it a lot more. We're going to see it a lot more in all sports. In the NBA, obviously, we've seen many European players kept coming over, and they're going to start this year a pilot league in Africa. But you're seeing more and more cats from the continent and stuff, coming into the league. It ain't just going to be the Serge Ibakas and the Victor Oladipos of the world. If you can play, you can play. And they're going to go find.
Question, Dr. Muhammad, like the add-on, like what Deshaun was saying, what you just mentioned, basically in general, if we didn't allow foreign players like to integrate into the NBA, the MLB, NFL, all these other sports that we have, basically it's safe to say whatever that all these sports, whatever, not saying that they still won't be entertaining, they won't be as entertaining, and then that will ultimately affect the value, because honestly, I can't imagine basketball without, let's say we still had all basketball and we didn't see LeBron James or Kobe Bryant or Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, to me, whatever, just seeing one race of people playing, not saying they won't be entertaining, but I really think all these cities that are making money off of these teams, they wouldn't be bringing in all that revenue. Because just like you said earlier, with us having all these sports teams, right, that makes people travel. Just like you said, people can spend thousands of dollars in one day. So how do you feel about that? Right. On that subject.
And I would say even players like Luka Doncic and Dirk Nowitzki, Tony Parker, again, he's a black dude, but he grew up in Paris. He grew up in France. Right. The Gasol brothers. Manu Ginobili coming down from Argentina. If you can hoop, you can hoop. So think of it like this, right? In any business, if you're running an engineering firm, and you're trying to build the best bridges possible, that's your company's task. You're only going to get one group of people, or you're going to try and find okay, look, if this dude in Finland who's a really good engineer, if this other cat in China, this other black dude who live in Brooklyn, I'm not sure what business model would, or there aren't very many successful businesses that, try and figure it out, limit their job market. Google and Apple, how effective do you think that they would be if they was only going look, we only finna pick white boys for our company? So I just don't think, Charles, it's a good business model in any form. Increasingly, when it comes to sports, I don't know about on the floor, but you're even going to be seeing you're already beginning to see more female executives. You're going to see some female coaches. So
the lady from the Spurs.
Absolutely. I think Popovich is actually probably going to try and line it up where Becky Hammond gets that job when he leaves. And if she doesn't do a good job, she should be fired like anybody else. But let's find out and see. But again, there's been a historical image constructed without documentation, as we've done with many things in our history, unfortunately. And in baseball, again, in sports in general, I think, it's reflected as a game of self-reliance, hard work, honesty, and individualism. So we talk about honesty. That's why, again, I'm not sure how big of a fan you are, but I'm sure you heard about the Houston Astros cheating scandal. I'm sure you know about Barry Bonds and some of his exploits and how he's still not in the Hall of Fame. And that's because, and I do think he should, I do think that Barry Bonds cheated. I also think he absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame. Him, Pete Rose, Roger Clemens, all of them. Again, that's somebody who watched baseball, and Barry Bonds was one of the best people I ever saw. And there's a lot of people that were complicit in that cheating scandal that are actually in the Hall of Fame. Like, it wasn't just the players. A whole bunch of people had to turn and look the other way. That's neither here nor there. But I say all that to say that honesty, and just being fair is a really huge aspect of the sport from its inception. It remains so. And as we talked about, it was a way for new Americans to be socialized into some level of civic loyalty and new urban identity. Again, you got people coming from all over the world to New York City. They don't know anything about baseball. They started going to games. And they really get into the New York Yankees. And through that, Deshaun, one of the things you asked about, with the Bulls and stuff, is where it allowed a lot of different people from different communities, because again, Chicago's a very segregated city, but it allowed a lot of those boundaries to at least temporarily be kind of blurred, where very vividly, because I'd be one of them types where, on the nights when they actually won a championship, much to my parents' dismay at times, I would go out and run the streets and it'd be crazy. Oh my God. And you just be walking up to strangers, dog, giving mad dap and bear hugs and stuff, white cats, Hispanic cats, people you don't know at all. But y'all all love the Bulls and y'all happy as hell this night. So people are able to unify through that. A couple more things before we get ready to break. And as always, there any questions or comments, don't hesitate to let me know. And again, a social democracy myth. That the myth is, Deshaun, that it's a game available to all Americans as both spectators and participants. And that just hasn't been true. One of the things, for example, where not as many young Black kids play and are into baseball, and a lot of that is very closely tied to economics. But as a little kid, and again, I want you all to be mindful about this as your parents. I would love and deeply encourage you to have your children playing baseball. I think it's a dope sport. It's a lot easier to try and make it there professionally than it is in football or NBA. And I'm not sure if y'all saw the contract that Francisco Lindor got. Them cats actually make a lot. Them cats actually make a lot more money on average than all the other players. They make way more than football players.
Contract's longer though.
It's much longer.
And they last longer in that sport too, because they're not taking damage. They're not getting hurt like that. So.
Exactly. Why people again don't see this again is beyond me. But I won't say that even for myself, and I love baseball, but playing basketball and football was more fun to me. So I do get that, but like you said, Charles, getting concussed or all the things and just the difficulty it is in making it to the NBA. There's so many great players that don't make that cut. But the reality increasingly the reality is that until recently, Charles, is that for a lot of parents to have their kids playing baseball is costly. It's a lot of equipment. The leagues cost a lot of money. Where basketball, you just get a ball and you go around somewhere and find a hoop. Football, you get some of your friends together. So it's not as expensive to play just informally, in a way that baseball can be. And we already talked about, again, getting into the games. That like the Cubs, like I know this was true a couple years ago, like even though I'm talking about, like Wrigley Field being its national landmark. And if you do get a chance, again, even if you're not a fan, like I would highly encourage you to go see a game there at some point. But it's going to cost you probably at least $100, again, for good seats. And if you got kids and stuff like that, that becomes very challenging for many families. So it doesn't allow all races and classes to attend the games. And even the schedule at times will provide barriers. So now the Cubs play a lot more night games, but for 100+ years, there were no lights in Wrigley Field, Stephen. So they had to play all their games in the day. They would play every single game for like 100+ years, will start at 1:20 in the afternoon. Even today, that's when most games start, but they will flip in a few more night games. But forever, it was 1:20. What type of people going to be able to go to like a baseball game on a Tuesday in the middle of the day? It's going to be people, again.
Mainly Caucasian.
Right. And people, and not just even most Caucasians ain't going to be able to go. It's going to be Caucasians that have, well-paying or some pretty flexible jobs, where you can take that time off, or you're your own boss, and you can shift around your schedule accordingly. But for most working people, that simply isn't going to be an option. We'll leave it there for today, and we'll begin with Placing Collective Memory on Wednesday. We're almost there, young men. So please, again, keep pushing to the finish line. Deshaun, if you could, send me your rough. Can you send me the rough draft as an attachment? Can you attach it directly in the email, and I'll give you some feedback on that shortly. Charles, I'll be giving your feedback in a little bit. Deshaun, send it as a direct attachment if you can.
Yes, sir.
All right, keep reading, fellas, and I'll see y'all on Wednesday.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too.